So this presentation will be more focused on the experiences that we encountered during COVID as research administrators within the institutions of higher education. And we regarded it as a disaster because there were a lot of limitations that happened to our postgraduate students. And so I'll be sharing my experience. I've been working in the research and innovation industry for the past 12 years. Started working at the university that I'm in now, the University of Zululand, and then I moved to University of KwaZulu-Natal, based in KZN. Then I moved to Rhodes University, and then I went back home to University of Zululand. And then I'm also a member of associations and committee of practices, which I'm going to talk about it in my presentation, and also an editor in the Journal of Research, Management and Administrations within the Canterbury University, Convent University in England. Yeah, so that's me. In a nutshell, I'll share my information at the end. So the content that I'll be presenting on will be just looking at the background of my presentation and also research ethics processes in South Africa, and then how COVID disturbed all of those processes or inflicted in all of those processes, and how we moved into a rapid review implementation of process, community engagement and access, which were ethical issues that were there, and then importance of community of practices. So within this presentation, I just want to firstly just give you a background. During the pandemic, it presented a very significant challenges to research ethics committees in balancing agencies with the ethics review and careful consideration in risk benefits. In Africa, in an African context, research ethics committees are further challenged by historical mistrust of research and potential impact of COVID-related participants. So in South Africa, COVID pandemic was also associated with the increase of mental health issues, as we are well aware, gender-based violence that escalated very high, and substance abuse, to name a few. Within the context of South Africa, again, the absenteeism of our National Health Research Ethics Council, which governs the whole research ethics committees, without giving us guidance, it gave a disaster, and this was regarded as a disaster because ethics committees within institutions didn't know what to do, whether to continue reviewing, to stop, how to advise postgraduate students in continuing their research, or researchers themselves. Funders were involved, and all of that happened. So within the context of our country in South Africa, just a big background of what is NHREC, what does the Constitution say about the structures of ethics. The National Health Act 61 of 2003 provides a statutory authority for governance of health research and necessary research ethics regulatory infrastructures, which then the National Health Research Ethics Council was established in 2006 in terms of Section 72. The main function of the NHREC is to setting the norms and standards for health research and clinical trials in South Africa, to determine guidelines to facilitate best practice of ethics committees within the country and have an oversight, whether through auditing, whether through annual progress reports that are given. So within that context, Section 73 also requires every institution, health agency, and health established at the health research is conducted to establish and have access to ethics committees that are registered with this council that we are mentioning. Only NHREC registered ethics committees may review and approve health research in South Africa according to the Constitution. And this constitution is controlled within the Department of Health, with the Minister of Health. So the NHREC is functioning under the Minister of Health. In South Africa, there are currently 46 ethics committees that review health research involving human participants and animals registered within the NHREC. So that's a background of the structures and governance of these committees and how my presentation will be aligning. So where do we come in as research management or administrators in this? So within this context, the South African research ethics landscape was complicated during the pandemic by the absence of the NHREC, as I've mentioned. And also there was a lot of issues of what we didn't know what to do, because the NHREC's council term ended within, so it was not reconstituted then. So since 2019 to 2020, there was no NHREC. So a university had to find their own way. The South Africa RECs needed to independently navigate their way through the first and second wave of COVID without national research ethics guidelines and oversight. And we as administrators were affected because we were managing these committees and we also didn't know what to do. And people have applied. And the level 5 was very hectic because we had to stay at home. If I'm not connected to my network, then it's gone. It is also unclear how the research ethics program's oversight was adapted in different emergency contexts across the country. Do you remember, most of our universities are not equal, right? We've got historically disadvantaged institutions, which they are called HDIs. We've got middle class institutions, which are called big, with those that merged, and we've got institutions that have rich history, like you have your Rhodes with over 100 years existence, you've got your Rhodes with over 114 years of existence. So we differ when it comes to how university functions. And this affected very well because in other institutions, ethics committees never set. And that also contributed very well. Discussing with as I'm the chairperson of one of the committee of practices, and we had a big discussion so that we could find a way forward. These are some of the things that came out in our discussion and findings within all 26 universities in the country, where as administrators did not have any clue on how to process applications that were received during the first and second wave. Ethics committees themselves were not equipped and ready to step up in mitigating delays. Some still were, remember as I've said, some are still using paper. So some that were using online systems were really going through like nobody's business. But those that are still using paper, it was a struggle because now who's going to go to the office and print and then deliver this paper so that we can review? It was a problem of go scan all these documents that have been submitted. RSCs adapting to the online reviews was difficult. Some people didn't know how to use Teams or Zoom or whatnot, so it was difficult, the connections. So other ethics committees couldn't sit and meet and review or approve, give ethics approval. The World Health Organization published a statement for all RSCs around the world implementation of new ways of reviewing, which underlined and chose a rapid review. So after COVID, we got this big word called rapid review. Researchers having to change their data collection from process from in-person to online or postpone or delay research, especially those who are going to communities. They didn't know how to move around it. So that was a huge frustration. No one was guiding researchers on, so now what must I do? I've applied. So how do I change my methodology? What are the processes where the SOPs that are in place when you want to change your methodology? Those were issues that came out very strong. Loss of funding due to timeframes and targets not met or due to no ethics approval. A lot of people lost funding during that time. So it was a big case. It was a disaster again on our side. Rapid review implementation. So what is it? What is this word that came out? So before we get there, the World Health Organization statement states, and I took it from their guideline, under the guidance of research ethics committees for rapid review of research during public health emergencies. So it says many articles and reports published after the 2014 Ebola outbreak addresses ethical issues in research during outbreaks and research ethics governance. Of note, issues were raised about time sensitivity and the balance between on hand and quality and time to review, and on the other hand, ensuring the protection of participants in clinical trials, many of whom are in the desperate need of life-saving benefits and emergencies. You see, so the research was very important, but was delayed, and then it affected the communities, it affected a lot of other things during this time, and our work within administrators and institutions would affect these delays. So rapid review explained within a context is a type of literature review in which some of the components of standard systemic review process are omitted in order to simplify the process of produce information within a short time. Alternative terms of rapid review includes rapid evidence review, rapid evidence assessment, rapid systemic review, expedited review, or rapid evidence summary. This is just what the ethics committees do. These methods are used to undertake a rapid review under the same methods used when you undertake a systematic review. However, rapid review plays a crucial role in speeding up the review process, in omitting some of the stages, hence making a less rigorous debate. However, now there is a conflict because what the NHRC says is there must be a robust discussion within ethics committees to come up with a decisive decision in approving. But this rapid review, we had to come in and make it happen. It also gave a lot of issues around that. So community engagement and access with the issue, some of the issues that were raised. So as we are all aware, the Institute of Higher Education in South Africa review all ethics or all research done by researchers using research ethics committees, whether they're dealing with human or animal, and grant them permission, which is called the ethical clearance certificate. Others call it ethics approval, depending on your terminologies. So universities are also expected to shape up their curriculum in promoting respect to communities within the drive of ethics committees themselves. Most research done in communities, like for instance, ethics committees are required for certain standards to be taken into consideration when collecting data, depending on culture or accessing indigenous communities. If researchers are not equipped or properly trained in accessing such communities with experience, sensitivity, respect, and understanding, that brings an unethical or an ethical issue. So during the pandemic, many researchers could not access communities or change their studies or do any of what is being said on their part. And those were kind of the delays that actually happened. So importance of community of practice, which I'm coming to the part where, as ethics committee administrators, we came together and established research integrity committees, committee of practice, where during COVID, we realized that working in silos was the most frustrating thing because we didn't know who to call. What is the university saying? What is the university doing? What should I do? So we established this committee of practice, which is defined as a group of people who share common concern and a set of problems, interests, and topics, which is ours, ethics and integrity, and promotion of research ethics and integrity within institutions of higher education. So communities of practice often focus on sharing best practices and creating new knowledge to advance and domain-fulfilling practices. Remember, in COVID, we didn't have much of this. We didn't care. We were fine. We knew what we were doing. We depended on our policies. After COVID, this came very much in handy. So within the South African context of research ethics, under the South African Research and Innovation Management Association, known as SARIMA, you can Google it. It's a big association that runs all South African research management professionals. We opened an Eastern region, Northern region, and Western region committee of practice, which governs institutions like that. So we have groups where you just drop a question on a WhatsApp group where you ask, how do your committee does this, and then you get an answer and all of this. So it helps really to get to understand so that we can mitigate what happened, just in case we prepare for another disaster, so that we can be ready to respond. There was a presentation yesterday that presented about the importance of being ready to respond and how when you respond. So also we are doing that to moving to that part. So there was a research that was done with Stenden on key ethical issues encountered during COVID, but they were looking at ethics committees themselves. And I know the people that were doing. I loved it very much because it covered these 5 aspects in what was learned. And we also experiencing that rapidly evolving research ethics landscape that came out, extreme vulnerability of research participants when there's a disaster, unique challenges to inform consent. We didn't know how to give informed consent, whether it's right to have a verbal consent and all of that. Challenges to community engagement during COVID, people couldn't access. Overlapping research ethics and public research, public health equity issues. Those were issues that came out really and that's why we regard research ethics and integrity within South Africa was also a disaster under COVID. And that was the biggest challenge that we had. So I will not wasting your time. Thank you very much for listening, DB, and joining me.
Well, hello to everyone in person in South Africa and online. This is Joe Lightman, and I'd like to talk today about a very unique opportunity that we have to build resilience and to avoid some of the terrible emergency management situations that we get ourselves into. So the idea is to build resilience in a world that's urbanizing and to look at this unprecedented opportunity that we have to reduce disaster risks. And in my talk, what I'd like to do is quickly go over what do we mean when we say urban resilience, and then justify why we should focus on urban resilience as an opportunity. Then briefly look at why cities are such a hotbed of both concurrent and cascading crises, in other words, compounding multiple disasters. And then end on a positive note by applying the Sendai framework to look at how we can build urban resilience. So let's move this slide forward. There we go. Um, Unfortunately, it's not possible to come to a final definition of urban resilience because there is no consensus about what that means. So I've taken a few of the representative definitions, and that begins with the World Bank definition, which is quite simple, just one or two lines, that it's the ability of a physically defined urban area to adapt to a variety of changing conditions, in that process to withstand shocks and maintain essential functions. So, very kind of straightforward. Now, Wikipedia tries to come to that consensus definition, and they are a bit more clear, or they drill down a bit more about what it means to talk about an urban area by talking about the stakeholders: individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems. And they go a little bit broader by talking about survival, adaptation, and growth, no matter what kinds of shocks, and they define them as both chronic and acute, are experienced. So it's a little bit of a finer definition. Then this should be UNDRR, the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, goes a little bit further by talking about the ability of a city to resist, to absorb, and to accommodate and recover from the effects of a hazard. And then they add in that that recovery should be timely, in other words, happen as quickly as possible, and efficient, in other words, getting the most value for money. Um, and that includes the preservation and restoration of basic structures and functions. So you can see this progression of more granularity as we move from definition to definition. Now, the next thing we need to talk about is, what are the boundaries of resilience? Because we often think about resilience as just that first column of natural disasters, which would include pandemics. But there are two other categories of risk that I think we want to consider when we talk about urban resilience. The first is technological, and that includes things that we're seeing in the headlines today, the cyber threats. It includes industrial accidents, fires, pollution, transportation, and interestingly, the breakdown of our systems, our infrastructure systems: water and sanitation, energy, services like health and education, communications technology. I hope we don't experience that breakdown today. And then the third category of risk is all about the socioeconomic and political risk that we face: conflict, economic crisis, strikes, wars, terrorism, and so on. So these are the broader universe of hazards that I think we want to consider when we talk about urban resilience. Now, how do these risks concentrate in cities? Well, let's take a few examples. If we look at the unfortunate recent earthquake in Turkey and Syria, um, you can trace back a lot of the damage and the loss of life to not just the physical shaking of the ground, but to the fact that many of these multi-story buildings, especially in Turkey, were built around, not in accordance with the building codes. And so they pancaked, they collapsed. So you've got a density of population, you've got multi-story buildings, and you've got construction that doesn't respect building codes. So that compounds the natural disaster that took place. We can look at technological hazards. We've seen in recent months a number of transportation accidents, chemical spills, and so on that result in either a cascading disaster where one thing leads to another. You might have damage to an ecosystem, which then leads to health problems, or you might have a concurrent disaster where you've got they collapse. You got heavy weather, as we had in Libya a few days ago, and then poorly constructed dams that have gone past their sort of normal lifespan, and you get the flooding from heavy rains, but then the flash flooding from the collapse of dams. And then a terrible example of socioeconomic risk is the havoc that's being wreaked on Ukrainian cities in the war there. So, an example from each of those broad categories of risk. Now, the big question is, why should we focus on urban resilience? Why does it matter? And the first reason is that both human beings and their assets are increasingly concentrated in cities. Um, and this creates a risk of exposure of people and those assets to vulnerability from natural and other hazards. And it's important to notice that a lot of our wealth and hence our assets, our productive assets, are concentrated in cities. If we look at a comparison of GDP versus national population, um, hmm, my graphics aren't coming through for you, which is too bad. Let me go back to the one that was missing. Can anyone see a graphic there?
Negative.
I guess not. Well, the point I wanted to make is that population is concentrated and in cities, and that's growing. So currently, about 55% of the world's population lives in cities. That's going to go up to close to 70% by 2050. So we're seeing a continued migration, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, to cities that are rapidly growing. And even though currently cities only hold 55% of population, 80% of our wealth, our gross gross global product, is concentrated in cities. So the graphic that you're not seeing here is pointing out that in many cities around the world, they might hold a minority of population, but they're responsible for a large percentage of national production. And that's true in a number of cities around the world, like Buenos Aires, Bangkok, Kinshasa, and so on. So that's just evidence that even though cities hold a certain percentage of population, they're responsible for sometimes 2 or 3 times that percentage of national wealth production. Now, another reason that we're concerned about focusing on cities is that the poor in many of our urban areas are most exposed to risk, and they're least able to adapt or cope with those risks. Now, why is that? For those of you living particularly in fast growing cities, particularly in the developing world, you'll find that recent migrants will settle in risky areas because that's where the cheapest housing is available. Those areas are often in floodplains on steep slopes. They're exposed to other hazards, and they're unplanned as well. So a second dimension of the problem is that those particularly unplanned areas, informal settlements, have few services and little to no infrastructure to help people reduce risk. And thus, they're more exposed to hazards like floods and fires. And then, after a disaster has occurred, the problem is that many people don't have the financial capacity or the awareness to cope with the disaster and to recover. They can't buy their way out of it. They've got to live with it. And often that disaster will reduce their ability to earn a livelihood and keep people in poverty. So we think that by the end of this decade, weather-related and other disasters will cost cities of over $300 billion a year, which is approximately the GDP of Egypt. And we think that every year uh, that this uh, series of events by the end of the decade will push over 70 million people in cities into poverty. So it's not only keeping people in poverty, but it's pushing people to be poor because of the loss of lives and livelihoods that comes with exposure to natural disasters and other types of hazards. Um, Now, the story is not all doom and gloom. We do have a historic opportunity, and this is really the focus of my talk. Um, More people are living in cities now than in any point in history. And the estimate back in 2016, when the community of cities got together in Quito, Ecuador, was that by the end of the decade, we'll see such a growth of cities that 60% of the places that would be urbanized by 2030 hadn't been built yet. And that was back in 2016. More recent figures indicate that more infrastructure is going to be built in the next 20 years than in the last 200 years. I find that a little hard to believe, but I think that the trend is there. You see initiatives like the Chinese Silk Road reconstruction, if you will, and a lot of national investment in both urban and transportation infrastructure. So the challenge is that we need to make that infrastructure disaster resilient. And by building that in, we will protect future generations from the vulnerability that they currently face. Um, Another interesting statistic or estimate is that by 2060, we're going to need 1 billion new housing units. How will those units be built? Will they be resistant to earthquakes and other risks? Where will they be built? Will they be continue to be built on floodplains and steep slopes, or will they be built in safer areas? And will they be built in a way that they come with infrastructure and services that help protect people against disasters? So that's the big opportunity, I think. Um, Now, it's not just about building resilience because we're going to be investing so much in infrastructure and new housing and new spatial patterns, even for growing cities. We want to ensure that we're adding value in other areas as well. We can build in a way that reduces greenhouse gas emissions. We can use nature based solutions. We can ensure that there is circularity in consumption patterns, and we can improve inclusivity. So that's in terms of the growth that's going to occur. Now, we're also going to have to recover from disasters because even if we do our best to reduce risks, the impact of disasters is still going to be felt in places around the world. So recovery also needs to build in things like equity and building back better. We need to invest in enhancing, especially the capacity of low income communities to respond to future shocks and stresses, and to do so in a way that is systemic and doesn't just go sector by sector, but recognizes the interconnectedness of sectors. And all of this is recognized at the international level. We have a focus on cities in the Sendai framework. We have Sustainable Development Goal number 11, which is all about making cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. The Paris Agreement in 2015 focuses on the important role of urban areas in both generating greenhouse gases and in adapting to climate change. And then the new urban agenda that was put out in 2015 in Quito is all about resilience. So this opportunity and the challenges are recognized at the international level. So why are cities this hotbed of concurrent and cascading crises? Well, a lot of it has to do with people. People are densely packed into cities. They're settling in high-risk areas. There's a concentration of both public and private assets that generate wealth from cities. And there's that variable capacity to go through the disaster risk management cycle of mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery, uh, largely dependent on socioeconomic capacity. So we're seeing concurrent disasters. And the big one that I saw firsthand was the Indian Ocean tsunami, where you had an earthquake and then a compounding disaster of a tsunami. And it occurred with another type of threat going on, a province, Aceh province in Indonesia, that was undergoing its 30th year of civil war in one of the most corrupt provinces in the country. So all of these factors compounded the impact of the disaster. We also have cascading disasters. And you can think of in the Montecito area of California, the terrible floods a couple of years ago that then resulted in devastating landslides. You can think about how global warming makes it easier for disease vectors to spread in the human population. You can think about that Turkey example of the earthquake with building collapses, largely because of the disrespect of building codes, and so on. So how we manage these is very important, and how we approach the management is important. Now, I just wanted to share an example with you from Rio de Janeiro. I was talking to the chief resilience officer there, and she has a fantastic command center in the city that was largely set up with the help of IBM because of both flooding and landslides and a building collapse. So it was put into being, propelled by natural disasters. But she said, look, I don't use it just for disasters. This weekend, I've got an international bicycle race in the city. I've got a demonstration of 100,000 people against the president, and I've got a strike of the sanitation workers. So my challenge is to use my capacity to deal with all of these potential hazards and keep services open to the favelas, to areas that are likely to be hard hit by a potential disaster. So let's end on a positive note with a number of factors that we can engage in to reduce urban risk. And that starts with the first theme of the Sendai framework, which is all about understanding the risk that cities face. And we can understand that risk across 5 characteristics of resilience. We all know this: robustness, inclusion, coordination, reflectiveness, and redundancy. Now, here we go with one of these mysterious missing graphics where you would see that there's a continuity of resilience capacity. We start with the very basics, which is awareness. What are the risks that we face and who faces them? We move then to what coping strategies can we put in place once we understand the risk. Then we move up the scale to what are the potential investments we can make in adaptation. And then finally, how can we transform city structure and city systems to be more resilient? So some examples of how we better understand risk are the hazard assessments that can take place at the level of an individual household and going up all the way to a nation state. We can look at who is exposed to the risk. We can assess the adaptive capacity of different socioeconomic groups in society. And then we can put it all together into a risk assessment. We can also monitor and forecast better using geographic information systems, modeling, artificial intelligence, scenario building, and early warning systems. So that's understanding risk. The next thing we need to think about is how can we manage risk in cities by investing in risk governance. There are two areas here to look at. One is, what's the financial capacity of cities to invest in risk reduction? And in many poorer cities, there are really serious constraints on mobilizing capital for investing in resilience. There can be a lack of government capacity, a lack of private sector confidence in the public sector, challenges in identifying and preparing bankable projects, and then other challenges around creditworthiness. But it's very important to be able to mobilize private capital to complement public finance, to be able to invest in resilient infrastructure and services. And there's a lot of money out there to do that. And we're seeing the institutional investors and the sovereign wealth funds more and more interested in putting their money or some of their money into green bonds and into infrastructure investment, given that huge explosion of investment in the infrastructure sector. The next thing where we can invest in risk governance is in building up urban capacity to manage hazards. And a good example of that is something the Rockefeller Foundation financed several years ago, the 100 Resilient Cities program, where they demonstrated why institutional capacity matters for building resilience in cities, how capacity can be built, what can be achieved, and what can be learned from that experience. So if you're not familiar with this particular experience, please have a look at the 100 Resilient Cities program. Other things that can be done to improve risk governance are to transfer risk. And that transfer can be from the public sector to the private sector, buying private insurance, for example, or from the private sector to the public, where the public sector takes on some of the burden of, for example, the cost of rebuilding houses after a disaster. This can be done through insurance. This can be done through financial instruments like catastrophe bonds or cat bonds, standby credits or loans, and indexed hedge funds. Then we can look at the transfer to the private sector through the privatization of public services in a careful way where safety regulations are adequately enforced. And then the final opportunity that many countries and cities go for is to set aside money in a rainy day fund to deal with both disasters and the investment in resilience. Okay, third, and we're almost near the end. Third opportunity is the big one. How can we reduce risk? And that involves investing in mitigation works, physical works like retrofitting unsafe buildings and schools, investing in more resilient infrastructure and using nature-based solutions. We can also invest in changing and improving spatial patterns through better land use planning and building codes. We can provide economic incentives for behavior that will promote mitigation. And then we can raise awareness about both risks, risk reduction, prevention, and response. And finally, we can enhance preparedness and recovery to disasters by making sure we have in place at the urban level early warning systems and the ability to communicate risk to exposed populations, better contingency planning in the public and private sector, better networks of people in neighborhoods, NGOs, and in the government who respond to disasters, building the shelters, making sure that plans are in place for evacuation and there are adequate escape routes when people need to leave urban areas to safer places in the event of disasters. And then better financial and procurement readiness. In other words, being credit worthy so that you can mobilize private capital for investing in resilience. Making sure that recovery after a disaster is risk informed so that we build in resilience to future threats in the reconstruction process. And then inclusion, making sure that no one and no physical area is left behind. So building all of that in, we think, can have a big payback in terms of reducing the cost and the human impact of future disasters. So for more information, here's a little bit of additional access to more details on building urban resilience.
Hello, dear attendances. My name is Artur Lysenko. Firstly, I would like to thank you, the organizers, for the opportunity to let me share the research results. So this study is a satellite synthetic aperture radar super resolution for disaster monitoring, and it was conducted by Scientific Center for Aerospace Research of the Earth of NASA of Ukraine in collaboration with Sergei Stankevich and Irina Pestova. So satellite data can be used for such disaster monitoring tasks such as flood monitoring, wildfires monitoring and prevention, change detection, as an example, as damage assessment from Beirut explosion, and many others. As an example for a radar data application, you can see the assessment of consequences of flood that was a consequence of dam explosion that was done on 6th June 2023. So here you can see a pair of images to the left, one pair, and second pair to the right. The first image here represents what was before. The image is dated 21st May 2023, and the second are the consequences dated 27th August 2023, not right after, but yet it represents the main idea. So all of the previously described tasks can benefit from high quality data. One of the main characteristics of data quality is its spatial resolution. Here you can see image with a spatial resolution of 30 meters per pixel to the left, and an image with 10 meters per pixel spatial resolution to the right. As you can see, there is a significant difference in object distinguishability on these two images. So what high spatial resolution gives us? It gives us more accurate data that allows us to create better classification maps, allows to increase accuracy of any assessments and forecasts, increases monitoring accuracy, and so on. So there are several ways to increase spatial resolution. There are mainly three categories of methods. The first one is filtering methods, as well as interpolation ones. The second one is neural network-based methods, and the third one are super resolution methods. So the filtering methods usually work with single image. They can adjust image sharpness, they can increase image contrast and other things, but they do work only with single image, and as a consequence, they do not provide any additional information to the result. The neural network-based methods, they require large data sets in order to be trained, a proper method to be trained, and are fairly to say are very hard to debug. So the super resolution methods, on the contrary, they work with several source images in order to fuse them in a single high resolution one. So they do provide new information, and they are relatively easy to manage because they are driven through a single mathematical model that describes the whole enhancement process. So the super resolution methods as well have their disadvantages. Like they need at least two images in order to provide any new information, so they do not work with just single image. Source data must represent a common physical property, because otherwise data we won't be able to process them in the same manner. Source data must also have some unique subpixel displacements between each source pair of image, because if there are no displacements, then we practically see the same image and there are no new information. And the percentile coverage of fast-moving objects on the images should be low as well, because fusing them into the result could lead to such things as image smearing and any other distortions. For this study, Sentinel-1 radar data were used, and you can see them here on those two images to the left. They partially cover Odessa and Kherson cities. And to understand why we pick this or that method to process and enhance spatial resolution of images, let's see some of features based on Sentinel-1's data. So Sentinel-1 data is not limited by cloudiness weather conditions, because radar data has a wavelength much larger than an optics one. So when in optics we could have troubles when we try to fuse some images with bad cloudiness conditions, for radar this is no longer a concern. Also the product of Sentinel-1 already gives us two images that are acquired in two polarization modes, namely VV and VH, where the first letter denotes the polarization of generated pulse that is sent to the lens surface, and the second letter denotes the received polarization of a backscattered signal from the lens. And there is a very short time delay between those two images acquisition. Thus, we already have two subpixely shifted images already. But there is a problem. These images do not represent a common physical property. They represent different physical processes because they are acquired in different polarization modes. And thus, something must be done in order to deal with it. So let's move on and see what. So in order to make this, to convert these images into single physical property, we need to use some backscattering model that will convert make a relationship with lens surface properties with a real signal that we can, with real signal values that we can see on the image. So what is radar backscattering? Radar backscattering is a process when the generated pulse from the radar that is received by the lens surface is being backscattered backward into in the direction of the radar. So there are three main categories of radar backscattering models, such as empirical, semi-empirical, or physical models. For this study, the OH radar backscattering model was used because it has a perfect match with Sentinel-1 data, because Sentinel-1 data provides us with the wave number, with the incidence angle, with the sigma naught coefficient for polarizations in VV and VH modes. And the surface roughness spectrum irregularities can be modeled in a logically constrained boundaries from 1 millimeter to half of the radar wavelength. This is typically the depth on which the radar can penetrate the ground. And the common physical property into which radar different polarization data can be converted into can be the electric permittivity of the lens surface, which is present in Fresnel coefficients in this model, which are denoted by big R. Why dielectric permittivity? Because it is in an isotropic property which does not depend on the polarization in what it was sensed. So here you can see the result of the conversion of VV image into source image into dielectric permittivity on the top, and VH source image converting to dielectric permittivity on the bottom right, on the image D. Now that we have two subpixel shifted images that represent a common physical property, we can use those images in the super resolution process, which is described by this super resolution model. So on the top half of the slide, you can see the simplified version of the model, and on the bottom is the full model of fusing several, but for this study, this is two images, subpixel shifted images, into a single a twofold enlarged image with increased spatial resolution and with preserving its original statistics. So as a result, you can see that to the left, two images with low resolution dielectric permittivity were used in this model in order to rebuild a single image with enhanced spatial resolution that you can see on the right. Now, having the result, there is a need to quantitatively evaluate the effectiveness of described approach. And it is done by this model that you can see on this slide with using the modulation transfer function approach, which uses a edge spread function and gives a resolution, which is an isotropic value that just typically shows us how much pixels are needed in order to distinguish fixed size objects on the image. So the result of this evaluation can be seen on this slide, where to the left you can see the Gaussian approximated edge spread function on the left image of the low resolution, and to the right of the enhanced resolution image. And below we can see their accordingly their spatial resolution values. And the resolution enhancement itself can be evaluated using the formula shown on the bottom, where the spatial resolution of the source image was multiplied by 2. And it is done because the spatial resolution of the an image is measured in pixels, and a source image has pixel size 2 times smaller than the pixel size of enhanced image. So for conformity, it should be multiplied by a scale factor. In this case, it is 2, because the image I'm reminding was multiplied to 2 times enlarged by the method itself. So the resolution enhancement, as you can see, is 30 whole and 800%, which is fairly close to the theoretical value of square root of 2 for the given mathematical model. So to conclude, in this presentation, satellite data usefulness for disaster monitoring was shown. Importance of spatial resolution increasement was justified. Key SAR data features were given, and the problem of using radar data in super resolution enhancement techniques was highlighted. A method for SAR data spatial resolution enhancement was proposed, and the quantitatively evaluated increasement in spatial resolution was 30 whole and 800% for this image, of course. So future plans. There are next radar backscattering model improvement or development of the better one in order to increase the accuracy of modeling values of this common physical property by backscattering models. Further enhancement of the super resolution model, testing the effectiveness of the proposed method on a high resolution data. And on this slide, you can get acquainted with some of our published works. And that will be all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Regards from Prague, the center of Europe. First of all, I would like to congratulate to TIEMS South Africa chapter, because the conference I was following as I could during the week. The Stenden University, especially Roman, to thank to and his team for excellent organization. And last but not least, I would like to thank the people behind the scene for the careful system support enabling this our conference. And you showed a great potential. You released through your students. I watched last night the presentation of students. There is big potential. So I congratulate you to your students, and I wish them a lot of power. I was planning formally to be with you in South Africa, but it was not possible. So let's hope to meet in India next year. So let's go to my presentation. I was formally thinking about just to talk about the project BEST, which is the real-time building evacuation and simulation and training system for airborne hazard fire. But as I was following the presentations, and there was a lot speaking about the artificial intelligence, I added there some two remarks about another research projects, which called FLAPRIS, which would be about prediction of chain of flash floods from weather model to early warning on place, and CRILOC, this is about crisis logistic in artificial environment. I will explain it later. It would be just very short. So let's go to the BEST project. This project should contribute to the safety of the buildings construction and their operation. It concentrates to the disasters in confined space, which might be caused by fire or toxic agent release or some terrorist attack, and which usually leads to that people are trapped inside the buildings or some other confined space, and they need to evacuate. So we tried to put together some several models which are around this, which most of them exist in many variants throughout the world. For example, the computational fluid dynamics model, which simulates how the behavior of the gases, the behavior of the fire, and temperature, etc. Then there are some crowd simulator which simulate the evacuation of the people from the building. There are some injuries models based on some tables with the experience from the past, and some dynamic buildings elements and rescue fire responder to intervention models. So we tried to find a way how to put everything together. This is the team. There were several companies and institutions, mainly from Europe. We were, my company as Steve was as coordinator, and what we were concentrating on was how to put together several models and somehow to orchestrate them to bring the picture of simulation of the disaster or some crisis situation in the building or in the tunnel. First, there was a BIM, there's a building information modeling standard that nowadays most of the buildings are being constructed using CAD systems. So as a side product of this construction is a digital model of the system. Let's say it's a digital twin of the building or some other space. So we wanted to use this data, which is a lot of data describing everything in the building or in the tunnel. I will talk about later. To use it as the base for description of the space, we will do the simulation. The simulation, there is the fluid dynamic model, which simulate what would happen if there is some fire or some explosion or some terrorist attack or some toxic agent release in the building. which leads to needed evacuation of the people. And that is some crowd simulation model, which model again what to do, how the people which are crowded in the building, what's the timing and what's the optimal way how to get out. And the base for the evacuation is rather simple. If you imagine that you are the green dot there as a person, and or in the simulation is some avatar of this person, there are several forces who are pushing you to go specific direction, which is to the exit. One might be the temperature because there is something burning behind you. One might be the obstacles on walls or closed windows or doors which you cannot open. So that you are still looking for some exit, and that is the vector which is pulling you towards the target. And that is the model of the avatar in the simulation system, which should feel somehow the results of the fluid model. That means that the avatar should sense the smoke, the temperature, and some visibility, which is also needed to be able to go to the direction which he wants to. So we tried to put together all those models, which one of them is this space description, that means the building description, then some simulation of this fire, etc., crowd simulation. And we also set the targets to have a scenario manager which could allow to change dynamically during the simulation the environment. In practical, it means that if we have the static model, the crowd simulation works just the avatar just seeing the optimal way how to go out. But if we have such a complex model, the avatars feel the results of the fluid model. They also feel the changes, possible changes in the building. For example, you may open the window, you may open the door or close the door. You may put there some other obstacle. There might be the dead persons which are preventing you to escape. So we wanted to put everything together to have a dynamic scene, to have the picture of evacuation as natural as possible. This is the software architecture. I will not explain that. It is a standard modern architecture as any other similar system, based mainly on, not mainly, but we wanted to be based on the cloud services. That means the architecture is cloud services oriented. So what we did actually, we selected two different models of confined space. One was the office building, and second was the road or train tunnel. For the first model, we selected a building of the university. It's a real building of a university in Czech Republic. We didn't have the BIM model of it because it is old building. In the ancient times, that was not possible, or not typical to describe it in by computer. But what we did, we scanned the rooms. We scanned the plans, and we created, in fact, BIM models from out of all the documentation and physical scanning of the building. Second case was the tunnel, which was there is an excellent possibility in Austria. The Austrian government built the special tunnel, which is suitable and dedicated to tests or practicing or exercises. And the tunnel has the structure which is on the right. There are several tunnels, several passes how to cross from one tunnel to the other, and you may there very easily simulate any situation from the fire and the disaster and terrorist attack, etc. So we took this, and all of them are described by some information elements. We we integrated all of them together to one system, and the base for the description of it was the voxels. Voxels, for those who don't know, is something similar as pixel in the photograph, but it is 3D. So the whole space of the building or other confined space is divided to the atomic voxels, and each of the voxels has its position in the space, and it also has attached some attributes which might be the temperature and visibility, etc. And the simulation is being made on this model from these voxels. And then we constructed the injuries model, which was based on some knowledge. It's again worldwide standards, which are described what would happen to you or to the person when you are breathing the air which is polluted by carbon oxygen, which is hot, and you are when some percentage of when you have not enough oxygen, you would be slowing your perception, you will be slowing your possibility of your movement, and finally you may die. So and make the obstacle for the others. So this was the model which was inbuilt to every of each avatars which we were modeling. So to this building, we created this 3D model in BIM, and we made the floor for fluid dynamic simulation. So the model could was prepared to initiate the critical situations in any place in the building. As you see, there was almost 2 million of elements and 500,000 of nodes of this building, which is not quite complex, which is standard building. You may imagine how big would be the model for some really large building. And there were also some dynamic elements. As I said, there were some doors, windows, air terminals, and sprinklers, which were possible to control by the scenario. So during the simulation, we may open the window, open the door, etc., and continue with the simulation. That means that the fluid simulation should react to that, because the environment may dramatically change when you open the window, and on the window on the other side, the conditions of the room are dramatically changed. It might even become worse that if you keep it closed. So this is the game of the fluid simulation. And the results of the fluid simulation was mainly the temperature and the visibility. So you will see this when we started the simulation, and you may see there the center, the point where the fire was ignited. So you see that the temperature and visibility started to spread out of the building, and it affected all the people which were in the start within the building. And if he looks to some animation, you see what is happening. So it is very fast, but it doesn't go so fast as you see. But you may see that in principle, all the building might be filled by smoke or by another dedicated fire. So let's go further. Okay. The other example was this tunnel. As I said, it is very elaborated device or space, and you see here the schema of this tunnel. There are some cross passages. So it is something different than the building because it has not so complicated structure, but it is very large. So the simulation within the tunnel was also complicated due to the size of the voxels. So if you look to the results in the tunnel, it looks like this. So you may see what might happen after the disaster in the tunnel, for example, when there is some accident. And this is, in fact, the input or setting up the conditions for the fluids. Sorry, I will continue from where if I find it. Yeah. So now to the crowd simulation. So we saw the fluid simulation. So now the crowd simulation, which has as the input the changing environment. At the beginning, we used the NetLogo simulator, which is very well known in the academic area. So most people know that. It is a very versatile tool and it is free. So our first attempt was to use this, but at the end, we found out that it was not possible, not able to work with such a big amount of data. So finally, we had an idea, why not to use something which really can do an excellent presentation, and it can work with big data, which is the gaming engine. So we took the Unreal Engine and we tried to employ that as a visualization tool for the results of the simulation, which showed up that it was a good decision because it really works. I will show you some results, how it looks like from this tool.
Yeah, if you can please share screen again because we're not seeing anything.
Sorry. It would be a big pity if you not see that. I will have to. Can you see it now?
No. We can just see you. There's no presentation. Anything.
And now?
It's coming. Yes, we can see it now. Thank you.
Okay, so I will go back because you should. So it was a NetLogo that we used at the beginning, and then we decided to go with the Unreal Engine as the gaming engine, which again it's some version. It was surprised for us. Was also free to use if you are not making some commercial games or films, etc. So we could use it in our project, and here you see some results which are much better than from NetLogo. The animation. So you see that there were some examples how people may behave in the during the situation. This one seems to be sort of strange because it is actually a tunnel, but to be able to see it from the perspective, we decided to model is at the bridge on the sea. So then we may look to the model to several perspectives. So in fact, this is concluding our work. We finalized the project. In fact, the project was concluded just a month ago, and now we have a material how to probably create some products for training center for architects to be able to assess the security of or safety of the building from the point of evacuation, etc. So finish this. Again.
Yaroslav, I'm not sure. Are you showing us another slide, or because we can't see anything?
You still okay? Sorry. I will do it again. The animation seems to cause me problems. So okay, so that was the best project. So this is about this simulation, and I promised you to tell you briefly about the two other projects which were using the artificial intelligence. One of it's FLAPRIS. It is about flash floods. That was many people talk about flash floods, and we saw one of them last week in Libya, which was very unfortunate for them. So then we know what are the flash floods. A lot of people talked about that. So some time ago we were thinking about if we have the situation with flash flood that how to shorten the time which we need to save the people's lives, especially, and it's everything is matter of time. And currently, what we have weather monitoring. We have the weather radars which can show us the water in the air. We have some warning system in most of the places. We have some action system, some emergency forces which can do some actions. And we have also some weather forecast models. For example, in Europe is very popular Aladdin, which models the whole Europe weather upfront to at least one day. And using those sources, we can sort of estimate where the flash flood may come. We can see how much water is in the clouds and how they are approaching the specific area. But it's still, our reaction might be very late because we cannot predict precisely on what place the water will come. So we thought about that. What about to use the deep neural network? And together with those models, there's plenty of data and some historical data and some soil monitoring together with the weather monitoring. What we can do is, when we have the historical data which are describing not only the terrain in 3D, but also some historical events, what happened when there was some similar conditions of weather or the rain, what happened in the specific valley after this rain. When we put together and when we train this model on the historical data, we may build something different than just the estimate. We may build something as a perceived impact, which is very qualified because we may show as at the map and the different valleys based on the historical facts, based on the soil monitoring. That, for example, the soil might be so full of water that it could not take another water in. So the flood just flashes over the soil. It doesn't suck anything. So we may prepare very precise and accurate and timely warning that can save some hours to the reaction. And then we may warn the people to connect the system to the people, to the rescue forces, to the emergency centers, etc. The project is about to conclude in 2 months, and it seems that results show that the idea was okay, and that really we are able now to combining all of those data. There is many of them. The historical data are very complex, but we may now be very precise and very timely with the forecast. And another idea was crisis logistics. Every or almost every country has some system for crisis management, some information systems, like information support, some procedures, processes, which are suitable and designed and trained for managing the crisis situation. But we had a COVID, which is some years ago, and what happened, it was so big surprise to the whole government, as at least in our country, that we were hit a lot, and we were not prepared to think this way. And all the systems which are the legacy or official systems, what happened that they was not used, and the government started to use very simple and chaotic communication based on different tables and by emails and by whatever. So there was really chaotic communication because they were trying to find some resources. For example, a face mask. There was not enough face masks. The people were preparing their own face masks at homes, and so it was that it might seem that the whole very carefully prepared government system failed to cope with this surprise. So, okay, we might think that next time will be better, but we tried to utilize this idea to design a new system. Let's say, why not to use this chaotic data from all the places we may find and have some use of them. So there were some mentioned Excel sheet, some text files, tables. There are some social networks, e-shops, online marketplaces, and other non-structured data. So again, the idea was, why not to train some deep neural network to train some ways how to recognize in these non-structured data the important things, what we need, for example, in the emergency situation to get. And if we use some automatic scanners which periodically scan those non-structured data, or crawlers which crawl over the internet, over social networks, and are looking for the specific data which are needed for situation which is described in the common operation pictures. For example, you have some areas of need, let's say those face masks, or let's say the fire extinguishers. So if you are looking for some extinguishers in this chaotic and non-structured situation, we can use this model, this system, and we can come to the results and find finally. Sorry, it doesn't go to the end. Sorry, this something wrong with the video. But finally, the system automatically finds what I'm looking for in the marketplaces, in the e-shops, etc. And it uses maps, so it is able to show where the places, where the things I'm looking for are available, and the fastest way how to bring it to me. And that is, it supports the logistics in chaos. So that's all. That's everything I wanted to tell you. Let's hope we were able to learn of it. Maybe you know Mr. Comenius. He was a famous guy. So I've hoped that we will meet some time later, probably discussing more about those ideas. Thank you very much.
What a pleasure to be here and a privilege to join you all for what an outstanding conference. I'm speaking on behalf of Oliver Schmidt, who unfortunately passed away recently. And so I wanted to definitely recognize and honor him and this work. So as we know, COVID-19 forever changed employee communication, internal communication, and I would argue for the better, because organizations' leadership have realized very quickly that in order to keep employees, their internal stakeholders engaged, motivated, loyal, supported mentally, physically, emotionally, they had to up their communication game, if you will. It had to evolve. It had to be more human centric. It had to be empathetic and caring and transparent. And so we'll run through some of the points and why that is so important as we focus during a crisis situation or high risk situations, the power to mitigate damage and long-term reputational impact comes through the power of authentic communication. So in any response during a crisis situation or any significant event, there's going to be a managerial response, an operational response, and a communication response. They are all absolutely vital to moving through an incident, a crisis situation, a risk with as bit of less damage and again long-term impact as possible. So we want the best possible outcome. So managerially, those are the leaders who are leading the response and hopefully have in place a plan already, but they will be spearheading the response overall. The operational response, we work with a lot of teams and leaders. They're focused very much on the operational response, putting out the fire, getting people to vaccinations if they want, imposing protocols for safety and health, all of those operational response pieces, which are critical and are often very much trained on. But without the communication response being embedded in all of that, it won't be a completely successful response. So the communication response to internal and external stakeholders, again, is a critical component in dealing with anything like a pandemic for sure, but any issue, risk, or crisis situation. So just in terms of making sure that we have that mindset that leading, responding is not going to be complete without the communication component. So planning and preparedness are nothing short of critical, as I know you all understand quite well. Planning is just so embedded in any successful response and really in organizational success. How do you plan to succeed in good times and bad times? How do you prepare? Well, first of all, you have to have a strategic crisis preparedness embedded in your organization. It's not a matter of if, but when a significant event is going to happen, and how you respond will be dictated by how prepared you are, because it has baked in, if you will, into your organization, into your very purpose, your reason for being. You're ready to deal with situations, crises that could impact your stakeholders, your brand equity, and your bottom line. That strategic crisis preparedness, again, is vital to an organization's strategic plan. And a current communication plan. Some people call the pandemic a black swan event. It was unexpected, but in retrospect, it could have been expected. Many experts say it was time, it was due. We should have been more prepared. So making sure that your communication plan is up to date, dealing with the world as it is now and not as it was even 2 years ago. Make that communication plan very, very current and agile, so it's updated consistently. And then ongoing scenario-based training. So having a plan and having it sit on a shelf, literally or figuratively, doesn't do good service to your organization or your employees. Have that scenario-based training. Go through a real life potential situation. What keeps you up at night? Let's create a scenario and put people through that training so we can get some mental awareness and preparedness and that muscle memory so that when a situation does arise, you are better able to deal with it. In any crisis, in any incident, there will be a highly emotional state. The environment is highly emotional. How do you make decisions that are really going to be the best and dial down that emotional piece as much as possible? It takes training. Like anything else, the more we train, the better we get at anything, right? So employee communication comes first. As I like to say, tell the family first. Your family, so to speak, are your internal stakeholders. Tell them first. You don't want them hearing news about your organization from the news media or from social media or from their neighbor who heard it from somebody else. Tell them first and tell them as quickly as possible. Be transparent. Tell them as much as you possibly can within boundaries, of course, making sure that you're not oversharing information that's not complete or not actually confirmed, but share as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and be consistent. So it's just not a one shot, here's what we know. It's that consistency and keeping your internal stakeholders informed. And why is that important? That's important because it builds trust. It builds loyalty. People are not going to be fleeing the buildings, literally or figuratively again, because they're going to know that you're going to consistently keep them updated with information they need and they want to hear. And a two-way communication is two-way. It just has to be bottom up, top down, across the horizontal business units of your organization. So making sure, again, employees want to feel heard and they want to hear from you. It has to be two-way. And that is really at the heart of good communication, making sure that your internal stakeholders feel heard, that you are indeed listening to them and communicating back with them. Eradicating uncertainty. In high stakes situations, uncertainty can undermine whatever else is going on operationally or with your leadership. So let's eradicate uncertainty. And that is important because it reestablishes trust that may have been diminished or lost and builds trust. So if you're communicating, you're building trust. You're building trust in your leadership. You're building trust in your organization. You're building trust with your internal and your external stakeholders. And no one really wants to work for, invest in, support, donate to, sponsor organizations that don't have a solid trust mantra. So build that trust by communicating. Keep morale up. You want to keep internal stakeholders engaged and staying as focused as humanly possible, staying, that team sense of supporting each other. And I think since the pandemic, there's been an awareness of putting together teams in a bit of a new way, perhaps putting together teams with individuals who complement each other so that together they can do greater things. So you want to make sure that morale is there. Engagement and that same mindset of keeping people engaged because they're working through the situation together. They're working through the crisis together, and they will get together and move forward for greater success. Keep them engaged and as focused as possible. And again, with our hybrid world now, in terms of how we work, a whole different a whole different game plan out there for organizations. How do you keep internal stakeholders engaged when they're not physically with you, physically with their teams, physically with their leaders, with their business units? So again, how do we communicate with virtual employees, internal stakeholders? How do we make sure that they're staying engaged? That takes upping the communication game, staying really hyper focused on communicating with those hybrid stakeholders. It keeps productivity up. Again, we don't want people to feel disengaged, lacking morale, not really trusting the future of the organization because the leadership isn't communicating with them. They want to be productive. Let's help them be productive and stay engaged by communicating with them. And then obviously retention. We've heard on and on about the great resignation and the quiet quitting and all of that. But retention right now, everything I'm reading is really a priority because that labor force out there realizes they have more options, perhaps. If they are not feeling trust, engagement, and being communicated with, their retention is going to go down. They're not going to feel any loyalty to the company because they feel like they're not being heard, they're being kept in the dark. So let's work on retention. We all want to work for, engage with organizations, businesses, companies, agencies that value us. That's why we stay loyal to companies and products. So let's think about how we can communicate more successfully to retain our best people. Creating communication allies. You may have heard the term, it's getting more popular, about allyship. So building allies within our organizations. And you do that by empowering your employees, your internal stakeholders, with key messages about what's going on with the current situation, but hopefully even before that, with your onboarding. What are your values in your organization? And creating those key messages that really convey your purpose, your mission, your vision, the why of your organization. Empower your employees with those key messages, and that will build advocates within your organization. Because again, empowering employees makes them feel heard, understood, valued, and they will advocate internally by sharing those key messages in difficult times and building and keeping that morale and that trust and that engagement that we've talked about. And then champion your brand ambassadors. Communicating with your internal stakeholders builds your brand ambassadors. And right now, brand equity in a crisis situation is what we're going to focus on, right? Our reputation in the global marketplace. And you can create those brand ambassadors, champion them, support them, recognize them, make them feel really, really valued by recognizing them, honoring them, rewarding them in some way. And that breadth of communication that they will be able to provide outside of your organization is invaluable. It's the old word of mouth, right? That's how we build reputation. We create our brand ambassadors who believe in our organizations and share the word with their neighbor, with their leadership, with their communities, with their governments. Create those brand ambassadors, and you do that by communicating with them and giving them the key messages. And also, training is incredibly important here. You want to train your key employees how to communicate well within the organization as well as with outside of the organization. Training and workshops are such powerful tools to build your advocates and champion brand ambassadors. This Triangle is really powerful when you think about what you want to say. So what is the communication you want to create? Why? What does success look like from that communication? What outcome are you looking for? How do you measure success after you communicate? But these components of facts, feelings, and actions are where you really want to focus. So telling people what you know, the facts as you know them, even if you don't know anything except something happened, tell them something, tell them what you know, how you feel about it. And this is a whole new mindset that is finally getting more embedded in organizations, being human and conveying emotional intelligence. We're all human beings. We all have feelings. And the super highway in my workshops, I talk about the super highway to the brain is through the heart. And I'm not talking about big emotional communication. I'm talking about just human to human understanding. Let's not be robots. Let's bring our humanity to our work, especially in a crisis situation. During the pandemic, managers, leaders, CEOs were one-on-one zooming in with employees and letting them know that they're not forgotten and that they are being understood in terms of the stress they're going through, the unbelievable new stress on all fronts, on the home front, on the work front, in the community, the health, the safety, all of those issues that are at the forefront during an incident, especially during a crisis. So convey how you feel about what has happened and then what you're doing about it, the actions. Here's what we know, here's how we feel about it, here's what we're doing about it. And by including those three components, you will create more trust, you will build more engagement, you will help preserve your reputation and mitigate damage after a crisis. But these components should be actually just an everyday approach in organizations. COVID-19 taught us that effective employee communication depends on communicating in a human to human way with facts, feelings, and actions. Consistency is really important. We mentioned consistency earlier. So consistent messaging where we feel, again, we're not just getting one shot here and one off there, and in the rest of the time we're in the dark. Consistent messaging keeps us engaged, helps us feel informed, helps us feel valued. They're not leaving us out of the picture and making decisions behind closed doors with stuff we don't know what's going on, which creates fear. And that's not a place any of us want to be. We don't want to live fearful. So clear language is very important when you're messaging. You want to be consistent with clear, straightforward language. No jargon, no acronyms, no gobbledygook, as I like to call it. Clear language that's understood across your organization. So every profession, industry has its own language, so to speak. But when you're in a crisis situation, or I would argue on a day-to-day basis, clear language is the smartest way to go. The smartest people use the clearest language. They don't have to use big words to convey something because that's where misinformation, miscommunication, and things go sideways. Clear communication, clear language. It has to be simultaneous. So that means not saying one thing to internal stakeholders and something else to external stakeholders. Let's say the same thing at the same time, and we don't want those internal stakeholders to feel like they were the last to know. That's the worst possible situation. And I know we've all seen it. We all know people who've gone through it where they're watching the news and find out something about their organization, or watching the news and find out they're probably going to be without a job. Horrible, horrible reputation damage. And then a one voice policy. And what that means is you want to identify spokespeople in your organization. You want to train them and you want to have them ready to go, especially in a crisis situation. But a one voice policy should be a guideline in good times and bad times because it helps to diminish any misinformation, or you have one leader saying one thing and an employee saying another thing. So let's have a one voice policy where identified company spokespeople are the ones who are speaking for the organization. That one voice policy is the smartest way to go to make sure that there's not a whole lot of confusion, especially in a crisis situation, but just on a general basis. So we do a lot of training in terms of identifying spokespeople and training them up, identifying key messages, um, who should speak in certain situations. Do we want to call in the CEO to speak during a crisis, or do we want to have a business unit head? So, who are we going to identify? But let's have a one voice policy. Convincing leaders on employee feedback is something that I think all organizations should really consider making sure happens in their organizations. Employee feedback is such a powerful way to stay ahead of risks, issues, prevent them from being a crisis. Employee feedback, they're on the front lines. They're hearing what's going on with conversations within the organization. Are there rumors going on? Is someone putting out false facts, false facts, um, false information? Is there a bias? Is there something going on where there's someone kind of flame throwing within the organization, if you will? So it helps you keep a pulse on employee engagement in terms of what's happening. Are employees starting to be disengaged? Are they actually going to undermine the organization because they feel disenfranchised because they're not being communicated with? It helps you stay on top of opinions, perceptions, expectations. Again, all of that important intellectual property that you won't get by staying behind closed doors. Making sure employees are able to share feedback with you in a very open, trustworthy, supportive, safe culture, safe environment within your organization. And it helps you seize those opportunities. Again, staying proactive, getting engagement, being able to head off any misinformation or potential disaster happening within the morale of the company, but also seizing opportunities, going, oh, I'm I'm picking up this notion, or I'm picking up this mindset. I need to go ahead and be proactive and seize an opportunity to head that off, or to seize opportunities to improve processes. Employees can identify ways that you can be better prepared, be more successful, be more strategic, save money. Maybe they have ideas that they want to share. Give them an opportunity to share that idea, to be innovative, to help the company evolve in new ways, to use technology in a new way. Seize those opportunities to advance your company. Involving senior management. So important. I talk about culture a lot, and culture comes from the top down. I also know it comes from the bottom up, but senior managers must role model their company values. And involving senior management before, during, and after a crisis will help people stay engaged and keep that retention. So if they are involved, if senior management is visible, they have to be visible, they have to be accessible, and they will establish trust in their leadership. Again, it will help prevent rumors, false information, and panic because senior management is visible. They're out there, they're talking to people, they're accessible, they're sharing communication, information, feelings in a real way. And it provides guidance and builds that alignment we were talking about in terms of teams. So we want to guide our people. We want to help them feel supported, to feel safe, builds loyalty. If we feel like we're valued and we trust in our leadership, they are communicating with us, we're going to go above and beyond. We're not going to phone it in. We're going to stay engaged. We're going to align with our teams. We're going to align with our colleagues and help the company be more productive because we're loyal. Senior managers role modeling the values of their company, the best in leadership, the best in communication skills will be the most successful. Some words of wisdom in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think this is a good thought for all of us. It's never been more important for employees to really, employers to engage with employees, and it has to come from communication. Let's share the critical information in a human way so that our internal stakeholders feel informed, supported, connected, and they will feel dedicated to the organization, to stick with the organization when things get tough and help them through it.